Hello, this is Debra Zimmer, and I want to take a moment today to talk about why you're not going to get what you want this year. I know, can you believe it? I actually started out saying you're not going to get it. That's just so negative and non-optimistic, isn't it? It's it's not usually like me to say that. I usually like to look at the bright side of things, but most of us, the fact is, like 98% of us will not achieve our vision this year. Well, first of all, I just gave it away. I'm going to tell you why. It's because you don't have a vision. You haven't set the vision for what you want. You don't know, hey, this year I want to spend more time with my kids. I want to spend, like for me, let me give you an example of my vision was I want to drop my kids off at school and pick them up for after school. And I want to be present with them. I don't want to be working and listening to them. That's one vision. I want to work X number of hours a year. I want to go away on weekends. I want to go away one weekend every month. I want this 3 weeks off in the summer. Um, I want to share my vision or my message with, you know, 10,000 people this year or 100,000 people or a, just 10 people. It doesn't matter, but you need to know where you're going, right? If you get in the car and you just drive, you end up, you know, you could just wing it and drive. We do that sometimes. Say, hey, let's go up here and see if there's a campsite. But usually you're going somewhere. I'm going to the mountains. I'm going to the beach. We'll find a spot when we get there. The exact beach doesn't matter, but I'm going to a beach. Same thing with your company and your life, right? People go, oh my, like I start rattling off accomplishments now, and I was raised actually not to do that, so it's always a little awkward for me. But I sit there going, holy crap, who's the person who did all that? And other people are going, oh my God, like what, how do you do it all? And I don't do anything except, I've learned since I was a child. I was a competitive athlete. I was a competitive swimmer from the time I was 8 all the way through college, and every year you sit down. What's your objective? What strokes are you going to swim? How fast are you going to swim them? What race is going to be yours? And then you come up with a plan for how you're going to achieve that, and the strategy for how you're going to swim the race, and how many trainings do you have to do, and how many weightlifting days do you have to have, and how many days of running and cross training, and those are all the tasks that you break it down. And if you haven't been a competitive or an elite athlete, you don't know that it's that involved. You just think, oh, they go to practice every day. But, in that case, the coach sets that plan out for you most of the time. And you just do what the coach says. And they customize it for, until you get really to the top, they don't customize it for the individual, it's for the group. Or they might break the group into smaller groups. Um, but every swimmer starts out that season with a vision of what they're going to achieve. And then they visualize through the year. There's all kinds of techniques they use, but it all starts with that vision. And if you don't start your year out with a vision of what you want that year to be, you're not going to get it. You may by chance, but you usually need to know what it is you want. Now, let me give you another example. When I was 23, 21, 22, what is it? When I get out of my college and I go get my first job, and I grew up in New Jersey. My first job was in the beach cities of LA, and I grew up with, I mean, we had a middle class lifestyle. My father was a teacher. My mother started out as a teacher and switched to being a travel agent, so she made less than half of a teacher salary. So we didn't have much. We had used cars. We had one car. We struggled to have the second car. Um, but one of the challenges was that I was surrounded with people with significantly more wealth. So our next door neighbors had Mercedes and boats and beach houses and trips to Europe um, and we didn't. We went camping because that's what was in the budget. Uh, so my point is, when I got out of college, I set a goal, and my goal was to be a millionaire by the age of 30. Now, I didn't know how to get there. I didn't know that my parents weren't raised with money. They didn't know anything about business. And so I didn't have any exposure to that as a child. I was an engineer in college. Again, no exposure to the business world. And I got out and I got my first job in a technology company, and I was like, I want to be a millionaire. And so I started looking around what other people were doing who became millionaires. But the goal, the vision was to be a millionaire by the time I was 30. And that drove all the other decisions. Now, did I achieve that goal? It depends on how you look at it. Technically, I failed because I was not a millionaire by the age of 30. But I think most of you would not argue that I failed if I told you I was a millionaire by the age of 33. So overall, I was successful. Did I meet the time frame? No. It just depends on how hard you want to be on yourself, right? Um, so the second thing you need is a discomfort, right? So I kind of explained it what mine was. Um, you can't be complacent and just happy and comfortable with where you are because there's no motivation. Motivation comes from the dissatisfaction, right? I was dissatisfied. I was tired of being the one who didn't have. I was tired of being the one who was told you can't afford it. I was tired of, and in realization, reality, I was not going without. But my perception of reality was that I was poor and I was unhappy and extremely motivated to change that scenario. Um, and so you have, I had the vision, and then I had the discomfort. I was not happy with the status quo. My first job out of college, I was $25,000 in debt, um, instantly. Day I first started my first job, I had 15,000 in student loans, which was at that time a huge amount. And I had to borrow money from my parents to get a down payment in an apartment, to live in. I was living 3,000 miles away from anyone I knew, except I had an uncle who was an hour away from where my first job was. And so my uncle went to help me get a car because I'd never had a car. I was a young single woman, didn't know anything about car maintenance, had no support system anywhere nearby. So I had to call my grandmother up. My let's see, at the time she was, I think, like 80, 80 years old. And I go, Grandma, can I borrow $1,500 to put a down payment on my car? I was kind of embarrassed and scared. She can tell I still get choked up about it. And my grandma said, and I've actually never said this in an environment that my brother could hear, but she said, you're the only one I'll give it to because I know you are going to pay me back. I wouldn't give it to anyone else. And she had a couple other grandchildren, and so that's how I got started. And I barely had enough money from my paycheck to put food on the table. Uh, I only had appropriate clothes to wear because my parents helped me out with some, but I had some guy ask me to go out to some nightclub, and I didn't have anything appropriate to wear. I was like, hey, can we go for a run along the beach instead? So, um, anyway, I was totally discomfortable. I was not happy with my financial situation. Um, Now, the next thing that reason people don't get what they want is because they don't take action, right? You need a first step. So my first step was this job, and then I looked around going, wow, there's a bunch of fancy cars in this parking lot. There were Rolls, like the president of the company had a Rolls Royce, and there was, a couple other Ferraris and stuff, and I was like, hey, maybe if I hang out with them, I might learn something. I'll learn how to become a millionaire. Well, it didn't quite turn out. That was my first step, right? I'll hang out here for a while and see what I learn. Well, what I learned was that they were embezzling money from the company. Not a good role model. Um, but then the CEO of the corporate office came down. Everyone got booted, or the chairman of the board took over the company, and he had an MBA from Harvard. And so my immediate manager was getting an executive MBA. And I decided, okay, I need to get an MBA. So at that time, it was the late 80s, late 1980s, and MBAs were all the buzz. And so I said, okay, if I'm going to get an MBA, I'm going to get it from the best school. I'm going to do the best I can. And I talked to my manager about, giving me a referral recommendation. And he said, don't bother going unless you're going to go to the best. And I said, well, I intend to, so I need a really good recommendation because my grades suck. Um, so I got a recommendation from him, and then I got the confidence up to ask the CEO or former chairman of the board for a recommendation. And next thing I know, I got in business school. Um, so it's like one step at a time. That was the first step. And oh my God, I went to business school, and I was negative. It's like I had $1,000 um, in the bank. That's it. And I went and I took out $80,000 in loans to go to business school with no idea of how I would ever be able to pay such a thing off. Um, but that just shows, there was motivation. I was like, I got to go there. I know that I talked to an alumni from that school, and I ended up going to Columbia Business School, one of the top 10 in the world, and I think it's ranked number one for finance. And since I didn't know anything about finance and I had just spent 3 years in marketing, I said, hey, I'm going to get a finance degree. Um, so I did that, and then I went back to marketing. Um, but each time, I just held that vision, and the steps kind of unveiled themselves uh, as I went, and I ended up at Microsoft, and um, amazing things happened, and I walked out with $1 million in cash. At the age of 30, actually, age of 35, I walked out with $1 million in cash. Um, because there's pre-tax and then there's post-tax, which you don't really realize until you get close to your goal, that when you're grossing that amount, the government takes 50%, especially or particularly when it's stock options. So I actually grossed over $2 million, but only $1 million of it was cash in hand. Um, so from that perspective, I blew away my original goal because it was just, I want to make $1 million. I want to be a millionaire. So those are the reasons people don't get there, right? They don't have a vision. They they're just too comfortable in their position. They're not motivated. They have to have a discomfort with their current state of affairs to move forward towards that vision. And then they need a step, right? They need to know, they need something, some vehicle or direction to go in.